Welcome everyone to episode 37 of What's That Sound podcast. My name's Stu Watts and today I talked with Shaun Fuller, who is a live sound engineer, musician. He plays in a band called Commoner currently and has done tour managing. He's done music directing. He's been the full-time live sound engineer for bands like Amity Affliction and Mallrat. Absolute legend. So stoked to have him on this episode. In this episode, we talk about the benefit of saying yes to opportunities, regularly evaluating your happiness levels and making sure you're in alignment with what you actually want to do in life, as well as the ability to stay calm and slow down and make efficient, smart choices. All that and heaps more. Stay tuned. If you could do us a favor and share this podcast everywhere on your socials, in conversations. If you think someone will get something out of this podcast, please share it around. We want to spread the word and, get this out to as many people as possible. To stay up to date, you can hit follow or subscribe on the podcast platform that you are listening to or watching this on. And I can't believe I haven't said this yet, but if you have any suggestions or questions that you want answered, be sure to send us an email. The email link is in the show notes, as well as all of the other links to any other information that might be beneficial. The email is podcast.whatsthatsound@gmail.com. Send us an email if you want any questions answered, or if you want to suggest any guests, anything like that, send us an email. All right, let's get into it. This episode of What's That Sound with Shaun Fuller. You're listening to What's That Sound with your host, Stu Watts. Welcome everyone to another episode of What's That Sound podcast. My name's Stu Watts. Today I'm here with Shaun Fuller. Welcome to the podcast, mate.
Thanks for having me. Stoked to be here.
Thanks for taking the time out to come and
pleasure.
My pleasure. Get in there.
Yeah.
Now we've known each other for a while.
Yeah.
But for those that don't know who you are, give us a bit of an insight as to what you do in the music industry.
Okay, so I'd say my main role at the moment is I work as front of house engineer for the Amity Affliction and a few other different bands, a band called Blusher at the moment. But yeah, so that's pretty much me as work life. And then obviously music being a passion, I play or sing in a band called Commoner, and then I try to do as much session playing and playback and that kind of stuff, so it's like the
fun shit.
Yeah, the front of house pays the bills, and then but I try to keep it as active with performing as well, because that's kind of what got me into all this. You know what I mean?
Yeah. Love it. Well, take us back to the start. Where did music start for you? Where did it come into? Yeah.
So I grew up, Dad was probably a big influence on my music taste when I was a kid. I listened to heaps of, it was just AC/DC and, the Saints and the Sex Pistols.
Oz rock. And
you know what I mean? I was a kid in prep where there was all that, we used to be able to bring in tapes, and everyone would bring in S Club 7, and I remember I brought in Poison or White Snake or something, and my teachers being horrified. It was kind of casual interest, and then in year 7 picked up the guitar and just loved it. So music kind of became the pipe dream, played in high school bands, just doing Blink covers and Sum 41 covers and just sweating those kind of bands.
Yep.
And then joined what would be my first serious band called Brighter at Night, where we met. Yeah, you playing for the Playbook.
I was in the Spin Set actually.
Oh, true. That's right.
Yeah. That's where we first met, but
Of course, yeah. Which Bassy was in the Spin Set too?
Was in the Spin Set, yep.
Wow.
Yeah.
Look at that. Did that, and then thought to myself, oh, you got to be responsible, blah, blah, blah. So I thought at the time that doing this studio stuff was that was a normal full-time job that people just went and worked and then made Michael Jackson.
It's the first thing that came to your head sort of thing.
Yeah. So I was I'll go study that. And then almost on the first day, they were jobs don't exist. If you're going to do this, you work for yourself. And I was just fuck, well. But anyway, stuck with it. So plan was to be a studio guy and then do music. But then as kind of things went along, met different bands, end up mixing end up, kind of being the vibe guitar tech I was doing a little bit of live sound here and there, but I hated it because I sucked. And it's just when you're not good at it, it's stressful. So then
super stressful.
Yeah, kind of through a weird situation was just at a show and then the live sound guy didn't turn up and mates were like, this band called Storm the Sky were like, oh, you should mix us live. And that was kind of like the first time I'd done it for, say, a band specifically rather than just like being the house guy for a night.
Yep.
Did that. It was on a profile which I'd never seen before and it sucked. But they had a show the next night, so I went home, did my homework, figured out how to kind of use it. And then someone who also became a friend, Jared Daly, he was there, so he kind of gave me a few tips. And between the homework, it kind of came off as passively decent. You know what I mean? Passively.
Like you could hear everything.
Yeah, that's it. It probably didn't sound good, but you could hear everything. Whereas the other, so sorry boys about the first one, but we got there. But yeah, that ended up kind of being like, that slowly grew into like they were really growing at that point and I didn't have the touring experience. So it was a great matchup at that time and they became real good friends real quick. So I ended up mixing for them quite a bit and then that kind of grew to doing more like local, Australian bands. Like I did Ocean Grove and With Confidence and Void of Vision, all kind of bands who are
some big alternative names. Like
who are just smashing it now, which is good. And then I did a couple overseas bands when they came here, but then I couldn't even tell you what year it is. I'd kind of, because I was still playing on the side, I played for a alt rock band called Harbours for a couple of years, but then it kind of got to this point where I was like, I'll stop mixing because it's not allowing me to, I'm loving it, but it's not allowing me time to, be in a band, playing a band, that kind of thing. Yep. And then, but that's at that same time, Ocean Grove, who I was working, just kept getting cool tours. Like it was like they did Download with supporting Limp Bizkit on the side shows where I'm like, okay, it's a no-brainer. I'm doing
ultimate,
that. And then they did Europe with like festivals and Beartooth, which again I'd never been. So I was like, well, obviously I'm doing anything I can to do that. And then they did Japan. So it was like, by then it was probably like, okay, cool. I'm not going anywhere because this is fun. And then I think it was that same year, later in that year, the job for Amity came up as well. And originally I was under the impression it was just going to be a temporary kind of thing. But then, end up continuing working for them. And since then it's kind of been, them full time. And I kind of took a couple years off that and did more focus more on Mallrat and Allday and got a bit more into like playback and MD or Mons kind of, that kind of stuff. And then now I'm back to doing Amity most, and I'm also working for a band called Blusher every now and then. And then working.
We've had Lauren on the podcast as well.
Oh, yeah, they're fantastic. I'm huge.
Yeah, their music's great.
Oh, yeah. Really cool. I don't want to go into this embarrassment, but I'm a fan of that band, which is, cool. So that's really fun. And then, because COVID, we all had a lot of time on our hands and I hadn't created for a while. So I started the band with a couple really good mates of mine. Kian Marangos and Nicholas Hubbard, and we made a band called Commoner, which listen to.
Shout out.
Pre-save it or whatever, whenever this comes out, stream it, follow it, tell your mates. So kind of singing for that. So so now my time bounces between doing that. I play a little bit, play bass sometimes for a band called Wayside. And, when it comes up, a friend Lockie who's playing Storm the Sky, I do a bit of, kind of keys, playback stuff for him. And then I feel like that kind of brings it to the present.
Dude, it's crazy. Like, and I mean, for you, it would have just happened bit by bit. But when you talk about it, there's so many different pockets there. Like there's so many different lanes that some people could spend their whole life in just one of those lanes.
Right.
And it's like, it's so cool to not only just hear about it, because it would be just like all these different experiences and just giving you so much knowledge, I guess. But we kind of like painted the picture now, how did it kind of, I guess, solidify? Like where did it come into play where you were like, I'm a sound guy now. Like yeah.
See,
Does that make sense? Yeah.
Yeah. It's hard because I still don't think of myself as, I think I am a sound guy, but I still think of myself as like, oh, I'm the person who plays in bands, but then I mix. Whereas really most of my time at the moment career almost became what was like, well, I really want to work in music. I love it. So it kind of became the path of least resistance. You know, the bands I was mixing it for, were more successful than the bands I was playing for. And also you have to, you got to put food on the table.
Yeah, exactly.
And I loved it. But yeah, I would say I feel like it was kind of early on when I was still playing for Brighter at Night. I remember losing my third hospitality job. I can't remember, from doing tours and shit. And then I was like, right, well, which I realized I skipped over the whole studio section. There was a big studio part. Yeah, but
we'll unpack it.
I was like, if I don't get another job, then I have to make money from music. So I kind of was like, for me, because so often things will come up, it feels like to me, it's not like you get this. I mean, the bigger opportunities come, but the thing that leads to those is, to me, it's not like you're just doing a thing and some big wig comes in and says, "You're all right, kid, come with me."
Yeah.
It's always like
so more organic. Just
it'll be like
mates of mates and
or you'll play a show and you'll be the opening band and you meet someone like yourself and then they call you up for the next thing and then So I kind of was thinking then, it was like, I can just force this by, if I don't get another job, then I just have to make money from music. And I almost looked at it as like every week I was like, well, all my friends who are gone on to do full-time careers or whatever, they're working 40 hours, whatever. So I was like, if I don't have 40 hours or whatever of work a week, I have to spend the rest of that time emailing people or writing music, just doing something that was like working,
It's a great attitude to have, and it's obviously why you've got that much experience, is because you've just like say yes to stuff, and if someone's like, hey, come and do this, you're like, sure, like let's just go, and let's see what happens, sort of thing.
Yeah, that's it. And I feel like I kind of had that eternal FOMO of like, so often, which I think was healthy at the time, but it's one of those things I've changed now, which I'm a lot happier. But it like, you don't want to miss that opportunity, because it might not be. It's not like someone comes to you and says, like, if a live sound, oh man, do you want to mix at Rod Laver tomorrow? Like, obviously you say yes in a half beat. So often it's like, when you've got that other thing, it's like someone will be like, hey, do you want to mix the second band of 4 at the Workers Club tonight? And then you go, I can't, because I've got that hospo job, and that's kind of the right thing to do. But you're like, you eventually start having to do all those little things, because you don't know which one's going to build.
Yeah. And I think like when you're thinking like long term, you eventually subconsciously are just like, what's better for my career? What's better for me as like building a recognizable brand?
Yeah.
Even if you're not actively thinking of it as a brand, that is what it is. Because, I'm guessing I don't have anywhere near as much live sound experience. I've done shows and stuff like that, but it's not like you're sitting there on socials and going, "Hey, I'm a sound person." Like, it's not like that. It's like experience, and you're in the weeds, and
It's. I feel like it's,
I guess from people that don't understand live sound.
Yep.
Tell us the difference, because you've done studio stuff and you've done live sound. Like, what are the clear differences?
For me, live sound is, if I look at it emotionally, it's way more stressful, but way more exciting. Whereas studio it takes more finesse and patience, but you get something rock solid at the end. I think live sound is awesome, exciting, because it's like you either nail it and the show's sick, but then you don't get to take that with you.
Yes.
But if you stuff it up, it's also cool, because you're like, well, it's all right.
You don't take that with you either. Yeah.
Yeah. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
So it's, and I think it's because it is so stressful, at least for me, it was so stressful in the beginning, that when you get that win, you're like, oh, wow.
That's
it sounds
what it could
good.
look like. Yeah.
Yeah. And I got that same feeling as when I'd players, and you just get that like, oh, I've done it. And, I move my finger this much, and then something massive,
Yeah.
kind of. So yeah, I say the big, and then practicality differences. I feel like studio, you can, for me at least, it's so much more finesse and you know, having the mic here versus here, all those steps kind of build up where live it's more like you still got to be careful and do everything right, but it's more about focusing on the end product the whole time. You know what I mean? It's like you can't afford to spend if the snare drum mic will sound better here than here, you don't have the time really to get you get it close enough and then you focus on the next thing because you've got to get that.
It's all about speed. Like
exactly,
it's about being efficient and being confident enough to make snap decisions. You know, and realizing that, like you said, if it doesn't work, it doesn't work. But and you just keep moving, and you just got to, you know, I feel like the thing, and I haven't done big productions or anything like that where I don't know, but it's probably a little bit more organized with more experienced people. Yet there's still so many opportunities for things to fall apart really quickly.
Definitely. And I think it's a big part of it too, is that like you've got to, because your gear's traveling and you're on the road and stuff, it's part of it is also being aware that and I feel like I've got our guitar tech from Amity's really good in this in terms of like, you know, something here is that like if you plugged in your monitors, you don't need to check if they're working before, you know what I mean? Whereas every day, even if you know, that thing, you have to check everything. You know, you've got to check all that stuff because stuff comes unplugged and it's almost like if you check it, it's fine. But if you don't, it almost definitely is not, you know? So I feel like, that's kind of
you're leaving doors open for things to go wrong if you're not being super like punctual and like, and, you know, again, if you're not prepared and if you're kind of just letting things happen, again, you're just allowing the possibility for things to go wrong way more than if you're someone that's prepared, rocking up 2 hours early than you even need to be. Or I don't know, but I'm just guessing. Because,
no, you're spot on. And I think for me, you know, someone who's got, you know, a pretty hefty case of time blindness, that was one thing I feel like has helped me, is at least for some reason it's like so many of the things that cause me difficulty in my outside life, it's like because you're just forced to put those things as in you're forced to make sure you've got plenty of time, get everything happening, because if you don't, it just like things can compound and go. And things going wrong is not an option, because at the same time, it's like with the show, you still have to do the show. Like you can't be the reason the show doesn't go ahead. Like it's literally not an option, you know?
Yeah, totally. Well, talk us through, you know, some of the people that have taught you some of the things that you hold now as being like the holy grail of like live sound, I guess, or just like live productions. You know, what are some of the things that, like that you can think of and go, I do this every single time and it's because of that person or whatever?
Oh, okay. So early in Storm the Sky, one thing is parallel compression. I feel like that took my drums up, and there was either Ronnie Gardner, who's, you know, shout out Ronnie Gardner. He's a fantastic engineer. He does, I think he does Jelly Roll at the moment. He's used to do Good Charlotte. Yeah, I think it was him who showed me. And so I was just mixing Storm the Sky and they were supporting Sleeping with Sirens, and he kind of just showed me this way to just process the drums, where if you don't know, and it's you've got, you know, you might have your compressors on your channel as per normal on your kick in and kick out, but then you send them via a bus or a group to another channel that you just smash the shit out of. Like you just, and so him, I feel like he really on that tour really showed me that, and took kind of just really was, you know, he'd listen to my mixes and he was really encouraging, and he wasn't being like, that sucks, but it was just like he was really good, and then just being like, well, this is what I'm doing and my show sounds good and this is what you're doing, and then kind of showed me the differences. And there was another guy, Brian, which I feel awful that I've forgotten his name, his last name, but same thing. He was mixing Beartooth and We Came as Romans. And he again showed me just a lot of stuff in terms of like how I gate things and that kind of thing. Because I think when I started, I think a lot of people fall into it. It's like once you pull a good sound at first, you just start going, you're like, oh, well, I know a compressor sounds good at 30 milliseconds attack, 80 release. And then so you're like, well, that's good drum sound. And then you do that, but then
it just doesn't work some
and it's like most of the time it works, but if it doesn't, you're like, oh, well, it's just a bad whatever.
Right.
So I think working both of those, watching those guys, is that I feel like I kind of slowly learnt more. It's less about what the dials say and more listening to how it sounds. So
Yeah.
yeah, and then I think trying to think in more recent years, you know, I feel like so often when I do Brian Campbell, that was who I was talking about earlier.
Sweet.
So often in recent years, I usually bring a console around, and I always love when I'll do a tour with another engineer who is mixing the band after us or before us, and you're on the same console because you learn all these things.
Sure, yeah.
Did a tour with Silverstein recently. There's a guy named Jake Katz.
What a band, man.
Yeah, they're fantastic. And I loved that tour because we had such a different style of mixing, but I loved how my mixes sounded, but I loved how his mixes sounded, and it was cool to kind of swap, you know, being like, oh, how did you achieve that? You know, like I route stuff differently now. I remember wanting to be like, I don't know if you do it in the studio, but I used to always like, it's like my kicks stuff would hit a group and my snare would hit a group, but then that goes straight to the left, right, as does the vocals, as does the guitars and stuff. Whereas at least when I do a studio thing, I like all the instruments going into a bus and then the vocals going into a bus and then them hitting the master. And I remember kind of describing that to Jake and him being like, oh, you could do it this way. And we ended up doing it with matrices and stuff. And that was sick.
Yeah, yeah. It would be so cool to like, I think more so live because of that instant gratification. Studio, like you were saying with studio stuff, it's like you're playing a longer game. You're playing like incremental changes that all add up to the end picture.
Yep.
You know, like you said, you're moving a microphone a millimeter or not a millimeter, a centimeter or something like that. Or, you know, like you said, you're routing things a certain way. And for me, I know what I'm listening for. So I know the choices I'm making when I'm recording, setting up mics and on drum kits and things like that. And I know that it's going to eventually come together into this big picture. And it's hard for the artists that I'm working with to see necessarily right from the start, because it's like, oh, that individual mic sounds like shit. But then it's like, just wait, it's going to be sick because I know all the stuff that I'm going to do later to get it to sound like a full song. Live, you don't have that option. It's just like, you know, setting things up, you know, the reliable places that you're placing the mic, you know, the mics that you're choosing, you're setting it up. Like you said, you've got your desks that you know how to use in certain ways and things like that. And I feel like, I don't really know where I was going with this, but I think the studio comparison to live is that it's like playing the long-term game in the studio. It's instantly visible. Oh, what I was going to say is like seeing how someone does routing or something a specific way, instantly it would click in live because you can see the instant effect of something doing a thing a certain way. Whereas in studio, it's harder to see that. It's harder to go, I can put things in a bus, but it still sounds like the same drum sound. Whereas like, you know.
I feel like little things make big differences. I think thankfully one of the things, you know, where you touched on it there with you have to throw and go. I think one thing that's awesome with, you know, particularly digital consoles and things getting so smaller, that if you work for the one artist and using the same mics every day and the same console every day, you all of a sudden do start to get that input, you know, about starting to tailor the sound coming even before it gets to you, you know? Like a big one I've noticed is guitar sounds. Is it like, sure, you probably get this with every instrument, but guitar, a tone that sounds awesome by itself or in the studio, like, yeah, that rips, almost doesn't sound good in a mix. It's almost like a good guitar tone in a mix is not always going to sound super satisfying by itself because it's got to fit that space.
So true. And the thing I think of is like, like if everything's good, then nothing's good. Or if everything's special, then nothing's special.
100%.
Because it all cramps and it all packs on top of each other and there's no detail in anything because everything is amazing at it. And that's a trap that a lot of people fall into in the early stages of mixing is it's like, mixing things in solo and taking the time to get that pristine guitar sound or making a snare slam. It's like in the context of the mix, you've just muddied everything up because it's just like squashing everything or whatever.
That's one of the biggest things I've loved recently about is like the console I use at the moment, Allen and Heath D Live,
Mm-hmm.
there's a lot of consoles that you can do a virtual sound check, like almost every digital one now, but it makes it really, really easy. And all of a sudden it means that, because it used to be like, when you do a sound check, you check the kick, you check the snare. And so you are mixing everything to sound the best that can be individually. Whereas now all of a sudden with the virtual sound check, you're playing kind of, if you haven't seen that before, it's when you record your previous night's show directly just after the head amps, so none of the EQ compression and sub, and then the next day during sound check, you're playing those recordings back in.
Sweet.
Yeah, so it means that all of a sudden you're allowed to, instead of just, you still work on your individual instruments, but you can check everything as a whole and be like, does my guitar tone sound good in the mix, and EQ everything in the mix rather than EQing it and then kind of pulling it all together.
And so like when you're, pulling a sound from a different night, how much does the different environment change things? Because I'm guessing you're using the same microphones, using the same drum kits potentially,
So it depends on how big the rooms are on the tour, but it's like for drums at least, the rooms have to be massive before you getting consistency. For some reason it depends how the snare reverberates.
Yes.
The biggest one is the snare and the cymbals, particularly in heavier music, is that those are the ones. Some days, you might do 1,000 cap or even 2,000 cap room that you're turning off the cymbal
you don't even have to have it in the mix.
Yeah.
Yep.
Because they're just so overpowering. And then other days, if the room, hopefully the room's really dead, you're really having to dial them in. So
or
I think
like open air festivals and stuff.
Yeah.
The cymbals just disappear.
That's it.
Yeah.
I think for a lot of things, like particularly if you're using digital, like Kempers or Helixes or whatever, that stuff's pretty consistent.
Yeah.
And then if you've got a loud vocalist, that's consistent. But the things that are inconsistent, that really the room changes stuff for me at least, is the drums. And if you have a quieter vocalist, because often if you've got a vocalist who is, they're just not putting out as much noise, the room plays more into it. And then sometimes you're even just battling physics, you know what I mean? Like there's only so much you can do. So yeah, say drums and vocals are the biggest ones. And consequently, they're the ones that like, if they don't sound good, nothing else matters, you know what I mean? It's not enough to have them just sound good, but if they don't sound good, it doesn't matter if you have the best guitar tone in the world. Like those have to be good first. You know?
I love it. I want to talk through more like, because I think the thing that's lacking is the understanding of the Australian music industry, because we see so much of, the overseas stuff, US and UK. They're in Europe, I guess they're the biggest music markets.
Sure.
Talk us through, the Australian music industry and how navigating that might be different. And I know you haven't like grown up doing sound in the States or anything like that, but do you have a kind of like, is there a generic roadmap? I know there's not because people like different things, but if say someone's listening to this and they're like, I really want to go into the live music industry. Yeah. Talk us through what that might look like.
So I feel like that it feels like there's two kind of ways that it seems like most people do it. Either they get the real practical knowledge and then they go through the way of they'll work at a venue or they will go work at a production company. And I think that's awesome because you get all the fundamentals out of the way. And then working, you might go work for a big production company or work at a venue and then one night you'll kill it as the house guy, because a lot of bands, until they're, making the income, they can't afford to bring their own engineer. So you'll be the person. 100%. So you mix so many different bands and so many different singers or acts or whatever. And that's awesome because you learn how everything works and you've also got to be the person who's fixing everything, So that's the part. That's not the path I did, but I feel like, finishing that is that from there you might get an artist who comes through and you kill it and then you become their person. If that's your goal. I know a lot of awesome sound engineers don't want to be the touring person. But like that for me was kind of the goal. Like I wanted to be part of work for an artist. So for me, I was on the other side instead of working on for production companies and stuff, I worked for bands. So
It was probably because of your background in, being in bands and knowing that lifestyle already.
Yeah, and that
more
was my
suitable
network. Because I came up playing in artists. I didn't know anyone who worked at production companies, so I wouldn't have known, I can send an email to JPJ and work in their warehouse and I can learn some skills from them. I was just like, oh, well, I'll just give this a go. And I think a lot of it's like I think live sounds is tricky because you shouldn't take on something if you aren't confident you can do it. Because then you're kind of risking a band's performance. However, you've also sometimes got to jump a little bit before you're confident.
Yep.
So, I guess in short, it would be, learn the tricks of the trade. I think maybe one part for me was seeing bands just I liked and things and seeing who did sound for them and then hitting up that person and saying, hey, can I come shadow you, watch what they do, and you learn a little bit, but almost you just learn. For me, the things I learned from that was almost the manner in which to succeed is like you can't be stressed. You've got to keep it cool when it's stressed. And then on the other end, you look and see there'll be a point, and I'm always in two minds, there'll be a point in your career, or at least for me, that it's like you might be in a position where your skill set, a full-time professional band, your skill set maybe is not at a level that you could charge a full day, but then you'll also get bands who aren't, or singers who a sound person would be really helpful for them, but they don't have the budget yet to pay. So I think it's cool to find those people where you can kind of join up together. And a good way is that, if it's just looking at local venues, like seeing who's playing at the workers, and just saying, hey, I saw you're supporting so-and-so on this show. I'd love to come down and mix your band. And then I think it's always important to be paid something, but usually at that level, there's a way that you can find the mutually beneficial amount, the amount that's still valuing your time, but also, you know what I mean? Kind of finding that middle ground.
Hey, thanks so much for listening so far. There is plenty more to come, so don't go anywhere. I just wanted to let you know that this podcast is made completely independently by myself with no sponsors. So if you like what you hear and you would like to show your support, you can send a donation to the PayPal link, paypal.me/whatsthatsound. The link is also in the show notes. Thanks so much for your support, and let's get back to it. Well, I think, and we talk about it heaps, is the networking side of things comes into play so much with the pathways that you can take. Yeah. And obviously you having been in bands and tours and stuff like that early would have really, we know people like Coach who's working with a lot of bands and, just people like that in the industry that.
Just saying his name brings a smile to my face. Yeah.
Love Coach.
He was around for a lot, and he's obviously still around, but a lot of my kind of come up, he was in the van with me. Like I feel like I kind of hear his voice.
Totally. And but it's people like that are like irreplaceable, but it's also the actual networking side of things when it comes to being in a band and stuff like that. And definitely people that aren't in bands, you can be a sound person, like you don't even have to have musical talent. That's but the networking side of stuff navigates you because you can lean on people. And when you don't know people, it's really difficult. So like you said, just, introducing yourself to people and going to gigs and just 100%. Being around that.
I think that's a big, and I almost sometimes now when I think about other jobs, I find it weird that it's not like that. Like, it's like if you wanted to be, I find it crazy that if you wanted to be a teacher, that you don't hit up a teacher near you and be like, can I come in and just see what you do for 2 weeks?
Plumber.
You know what I mean?
Can I just watch you plumb for a bit?
Yeah, but that's like, I feel like surely you'd want to do because then you got to study for 4 years and then you find if you like the job. So I reckon you probably hit the nutshell. It's like, if I was to make it as unconvoluted as possible, it would just be going to shows, talking to people. And I think as long as you're polite and respectful of their time, because sometimes you go to a show and whoever's working it, it'll be a stressful day and they can't chat. But inevitably, I feel like most people, it's like if you're keen and excited about it, the reason they're doing the role, you'd hope, is because they're keen and excited about it too. So they're going to want to chat to you, So
I think it's pretty easy to see.
Yeah.
It's like, it's easy to see the kids who are keen.
Yeah.
And it's also easy to see the people that aren't jaded and fucking don't want to just be a dick to you.
Yeah.
You know, and it's pretty easy to see that, but that's also, you need to pay attention to that stuff.
Yeah.
You know, if someone's busy and they can't talk, that doesn't mean they're being a dick.
Yeah.
But you need to pay attention to those sorts of social cues as well.
Yeah.
And that's probably way harder and way more to actually understand and unpack being in a live environment where there's so many moving parts.
Yeah.
In the studio, there's 5 people maximum.
Yeah.
You know,
true.
there's like one sound engineer, maybe a producer. Like
sure.
there's there's not as much to navigate. There's only that experience that you can get. But like in a live environment, there's so many people.
Yeah, and it can be stress. And I think too, one thing, it's touring world, but particularly Australia, if you're doing an Australian tour, the show finishes like 11:30, whatever. You're almost always on a tour not getting your 8 hours, 9 hours sleep. So I think it compounds that sometimes, not that it's an excuse, I feel like you should always be nice, but sometimes people don't, your social skills aren't as on point when you're on 4 hours sleep and you're stressed and stuff.
Totally.
But yeah, I think overall it's just like talking to people, because most people at some point when they can will be happy to chat, or even if they're not, you just ask the next person there, because you don't need 100 opportunities. You know what I mean? You only need a couple. So if you go up to 50, whatever it takes, 50 sound people and just chat to them, you're not going to connect with all of them, but you will just connect with a couple.
Yep.
And they'll hopefully be willing to share their knowledge, and then it kind of just progresses from there.
And I think the more that you can be open to saying to yourself, it's probably not going to work out with any of these people, having that kind of awareness of like, this is rare that it's probably going to work. I think that's kind of somewhat of a good mentality, not being like, I'm not going to succeed, but more so that, because it's so hard to click with someone on such a level that their workflow or, you know, the style of music that they like, all these little pieces, it's very rare that would click. So to find that in someone is awesome.
Yeah, I think too, that's one of those things that like when we studied sound, is that they spoke really a lot about the networking, and like my music industry class, even like school, you spoke a lot about the networking. And initially I thought it was like, oh, so you just find someone, you know, you think, oh, I want to work in the studio, and I know Stu has a studio. So you go and you be like, hey, Stu, I'd like to come work in your studio. And that's the network. Whereas I realized later on, I think the networking, for it to really work, it to a degree has to be mutually beneficial, but it also has to be at least in music, it has to be a personal connection. I think so often it can't be enough that it's like, oh, well, you're, I don't know.
You're working with that band or something.
Yeah, it's like, oh, you're working with that band, and
we're going to be mates.
Yeah, it's like, it doesn't, and then I think, you know, going with like not the thinking you're going to fail thing, but it's almost almost like numbers, you know. It's like when you're trying to say, really if you don't have a full month or full year of bookings and you want to fill it out, there's nothing stopping you from emailing 50 band manager or 50 bands or whatever, because again, you don't need 50 to say yes. If you say if 50 say yes, you're in a pickle. You only need a couple, you know. And I think if it's your goal to work for you know, an artist, like to focus on a couple artists, the client base you need becomes smaller and smaller, you know, like you don't need to be working for 100 bands. So yeah, it seems like, chatting to people and just trying as many people as you can, you know, not letting it being discouraging if you go to talk to Metallica's sound person and they don't want to chat to you. Don't let that discourage you from talking, talking to AC/DC's sound person, you know what I mean? Like just
totally
try everyone, because people will, and I get pumped. I feel like I learn so much when someone comes and asks me they'll be like, oh, what are you doing with this and that? And then I'll go, oh, what am I doing with this? Or
it's all instinct.
And then, you'll explain it to them and you realize, oh, that's right, that is a good idea. Or you explain it and realize, oh, that was just fixing another I should, you know what I mean?
Yeah, like, I could do this a better way. I love it. And I think, I mean, it's one thing that I'm really getting out of this podcast is just hearing all the different approaches, because you can't. Everyone's different. Everyone
Yep.
approaches things in different ways. Everyone reacts
sure.
differently, and that sort of thing. So one of the great things that I love is experiencing the way other people do things, because I might want to do it a different way.
Yeah.
But just seeing that and being like, that is a possibility.
Yep.
It's awesome.
That's
it
it.
just broadens your landscape so much more.
Yeah. And I think that's how you get better, is it like, is seeing what other engineers do. And it might even be the smallest thing, or it might be a massive thing. And, you know, like, for example, if you say you get someone else's show file, if you just use their show file, it's not going to sound good. But often you might watch someone mixing and be like, oh, they're doing that thing with the kick. And then you'll bring that in and find that works great with what I do with the guitars, you know? So it's like,
sick.
Yeah, picking up everyone's skills.
Yep. Tell us about, the other side of the things that you do, the creative side of things, songwriting and music, and, and, you've been in the studio in the past as well. What is appealing about that side of things for you? And
Dude, that's such a hard, because I feel like sometimes I ask myself that. But I think for me, writing and performing music in particular, for me, I think the appeal is just having an outlet to express myself, like I feel like, I don't hide from the fact that, like I deal with, my mental health issues, and won't say more or less, it's just, that's something I deal with. And as I think a lot of people attracted to music do for some reason, but I think being in a band, playing, even when I was just playing guitar, playing bass, it just gives you this moment, this window to kind of express yourself. And I think writing songs is like that too. It's like, for me, not only like I'm relatively new to being a singer, so writing the lyrics and the melody is obviously, it's a very almost literal way to express yourself. But for some reason, even when playing guitar, playing bass or keys or whatever, it still gave me that feeling. So I think that's what...
It's allowing yourself to be vulnerable, because in life there's not very many opportunities for you to get deep, and, unless you have someone that you can really trust. And
it's almost like...
It's different still, because it's an expression. It's like, and, people find ways to express themselves in different avenues, but music is... There's something like deep about it.
Yeah.
Because it's based on our whole life's experience. I don't know.
Yeah. I think it's one of those things that anyone who's played in a band, enjoyed it, can agree on it. There's just something about it that just feels good. You know what I mean? Like I always I get that, like if I have a really long or hard day, whether it's like writing music or practicing or something, you get that, you come away with that dopamine feeling and that satisfaction feeling, because it's just something about maybe even connecting with the other people you're playing with or performing with that kind of, it all feels good. And you don't, at least I don't know, the people I play with, you couldn't put it, it feels good because of A, B, and C. It's just an enjoyable thing to do.
Yeah.
I even think the musicians who, I feel like the more successful they get, the more they do it. Sometimes people end up taking it for granted. They'll get a bit jaded, but you can tell they still enjoy it. If they have a good show or a bad show, they're still enjoying the playing, I don't think there's many people, there are some, but I don't think there's many people who are doing it just because it's a job,
And I think probably the other part of it is that it's physical, in art, there's not too many physical art, dance is one, music. There's not heaps where it's a full body, physical, mental, everything stimulated.
Yeah, that's it. It's a bit of like, both your logical brain and creative brain are going, and then, depending on your instrument, depending on how much you move. And I think particularly performing the bands I've always played in, I've done a bit of pop stuff where it's more about really just folk, but so often, playing in your pop punk, your hardcore, your rock bands, a big part of it is putting on a big rock show, which is moving around, going nuts, like throwing your neck out. Do you know what I mean? Like that, particularly when, in the earlier, like your 20, late 20s, like that and below, that almost to me, and still is what defines a good band, is that if they're performing it, and it's not enough to just go out and play your instruments, because if I wanted to listen to that, I could just listen to your CD. It's about, so I think because I value that, doing that. So you get that, you get sweaty and you get, you know, you rock, you know, like
it's visceral.
Yeah,
I think
it's rocking.
Yeah, it's like, again, it's like the sound. I mean, this is probably what the other side of being attracted to being a live sound person, or, you know, working in the live music industry, is because of that experience. It's like you can't get that from. You can get similar feelings from being in a studio, like, but it's nothing's the same as
and I think it's a different type of
you
know, I feel like if you're more attracted to the songwriting part of being in a band, maybe being in the studio is going to more, whereas for me, I enjoy songwriting, but my favorite part about being in a band is performing. You know, for me, honestly, it's like I would, if someone said to me tomorrow, I don't know, AC/DC need a rhythm guitarist or something, I'd be like, I'd love to do that, but honestly, can I just be the session player? You know what I mean? I don't want to be in the band. I just want to play.
So that's what you're like looking to do more of now?
I think so. I think it's just I feel like COVID really put things in perspective for me, and that it made me. I think I probably wasn't always as positive as I should have been about what I get to do. I took it for granted, definitely, and I always thought, oh, you know, I'm loving touring, but I want to play as well. COVID made me realize how much I love what I do in terms of the touring, the mixing, the whole thing about it. I really enjoy it, and I think that's something that if you manage to get a job like that also you can sustain yourself. You don't want to let that go. However, the other side of COVID made me realize, because none of this stuff is sure, everything can go away in a second, that you don't need to let yourself get put in a box, you know, just because everyone's like, oh, you're a sound guy or you're a sound person or whatever. You don't have, you can do whatever you want, you know? So I'm kind of like, I'm going to keep following mixing because I like it, and I like to think I'm good at it, you know, so it's has that satisfaction, but also I love performing. So I want to, you know, essentially being self-employed, I want to pursue those roles, both as being as a creative, like in playing in my own band, but also, you know, in the sphere of, you know, maybe playing for other people, particularly because I think the way so much live performance is going is that it's rare you see a band now that's just playing with amps, and I hope I'm not ruining anything, but it's rare that it's just...
I think most people know these days.
It's honestly, it's shocking when you see a band not playing to a click track. And with all that stuff that comes into it, I feel like I've kind of seen there's a way for me to combine my technical knowledge with being able to play as well, because often it's like, well, if you're playing in a band, usually your skill set's spent on that, so you have to pay someone to come in and do your in-ears or make your playback session, whereas because of enjoyment, I've pursued both those sides of things. I'm kind of trying to pick up more jobs where I do that, but I think as well, you know?
I do know, and I think it's important that, like, this is an important discussion, and it's an important thing for people that maybe have been doing it for 5 to 10 years and have felt that, like, similar feelings to you, where it's like, I'll just do it. Like, this is just what I do. People can go on autopilot. They can cruise along, especially if they're busy. You know, if you're successful in especially a live environment where it's like, you know, tours can happen at any time in the year. You can go to different countries. All of these different things that add up to you being busy for a lot of the time and just not having time to yourself. Like you were telling me before we started the podcast, it was like, you've got all this shit that you have to sort out before you go on tour again.
And that's it.
That just happens. Life happens. You got to pay the bills, all that sort of stuff. So it's really important that we do take the time to evaluate and say, what do I actually want to be doing? And how do I spend time in getting that to be part of my life now?
You know, and I think it's one of those, it's like it's not, I think music's good, and it's not like if you want to, I've never started a coffee shop, but if you want to start a coffee shop, really you kind of can't be doing, you've got to go buy the machine and blah, blah, blah. Whereas I think with music, because it's so often freelance, is that there's no one, at least I'm not going to tour 12 months a year. You'd die. You know, you just couldn't do it. So you get time in between, and you are your own boss to a degree, so you can spend your time how you like. So I think that's one thing I've just really thought about more and more, and gone like, well, what do I enjoy doing? And then that's how I'm going to spend my time. And, it's within reason. I can't just go to the beach every day, but
yeah.
like I'm more mean as I'm like, well, if I think to myself, well, I'm loving doing my live sound, but maybe when I get home from tour, I'll focus on the other thing I love doing and see if I can make some work from that. Because if it doesn't work out, then it doesn't matter. And if it does, awesome. You can do both. Because even within live sound, like I mainly do front of house, but sometimes you won't say no if someone says, hey, do you want to do monitors? Or, hey, do you want to, I try not to TM. It's hard. Like I don't personally enjoy it, but you do those multiple roles. So there's no reason I at least see of why you can't step and do something else, I know I know I can play guitar. I know I can play. So, and I know I can run a playback session or do monitors, So I'm
and
like,
it's hard. I think the hard thing for most people that can't take that time to pivot is probably it's fear. It's like, I won't get this opportunity again, or I will turn people off from picking me because they don't think I'm reliable or something like that.
Yeah. And that's the thing. I think it's one thing I have to be aware of, because even though it's like, I'm not a brand, it's like, it feels to me, it's like every person in the music industry, has their kind of personal brand that they're known for, particularly, and they think, so I think it's still important for me at least, to not be like, oh, I don't do X, Y, and Z anymore. But it's more, I think for me, it's like, I'm still do sound. I still do it to a professional level, and I will continue to do so. But it's like, I want to do this as well. So if there's people who could utilize that combination of skill sets, then hopefully there'll be more work in that realm as well. Because you can do, and it is applicable, even like the stuff I've learnt from doing playback and doing, working on arrangements and just live sound stuff, work like as a player in my own band and other bands, has translated really well to front of house mixing. Because all of a sudden I used to only think about everything from microphone onwards. Whereas now I realize what you can and can't do with playback and what you can and can't do with like a Kemper and stuff. All of a sudden, instead of saying to someone, can you make this better? I can say, oh, actually I did this. Can we try this thing? So I feel like doing both sides of the thing is really helpful, because then you're not stuck in what's possible in one or the other.
It's again, you're just kind of giving yourself more opportunities.
Yeah.
And like you said, if you're doing guitar teching, if you're doing monitors even, you're going to be learning stuff about the monitor like setup that you wouldn't have learned if you were only doing front of house.
Oh,
I mean, I don't know how many people don't know both, but...
Yeah, but it's definitely, I think as you get further into it, it's way more of a different skill set. It's almost like...
And how you treat the artist and how you talk to the artist, what their needs are. It's like you're addressing a different part of that performance or that big picture.
That's it. And it's a completely different like way I think, monitors versus front of house. Like you have to almost get in a different mindset. I remember when I first, because I feel like you start off with I'm going to burp. When you're mixing your smaller artists, you're never really doing front of house and monitors. But once you get go on to bigger artists or bigger shows, they'll have a separate person. So my first instinct is coming from the front of house thing was like, oh, well, I'll mix the mons like that. I'll just make it sound sick.
Yeah.
But that's not what...
They don't want that.
No, it's not about making practical mixes.
Yeah.
I feel like you're dealing with physics way more. If you've got wedges, you have to just think about... Because if you don't, you're going to get feedback and whatnot. Yeah. But B, you have to think about everything in terms of like usability first.
Well, you don't want the sounds to blend into each other.
No.
You want I want to be able to hear that vocal. Like
and even
that has to stand out.
Even like I find that as I'm playing, as in like I had this the other day. I was playing bass, and I was because we mix our own ears as well. Like so. And I pulled up my mix that I'd used a few shows ago, and I was like, oh man, I'm like, the guitars aren't that vibey. It's like, I just want to hear more everything and stuff. So you start bringing everything in and you're like, oh, well, if I make this sound good, bass guitar is not that prominent in a mix. So all of a sudden I'm not focusing on my stuff. And I was like, wait, no, you have to really pull it back. Like I still like to have a bit of everything in there, but you have to have that bass guitar and that click track loud. And I think when doing monitors, it's that same thing. You have to realize, because I used to get frustrated. They'd be like, oh, these monitor mixes sound shit, but I can't change them because the artist. But then you realize, oh, it's not my job to make something that's creatively nice. It's to make something that allows that artist to perform the best they can.
Love it. That's awesome, man. Well, you know, one of the things I like to do every podcast is to get, you know, one of you, or maybe one or two of your favorite bits of advice, or the first thing that comes to your head, first of all, for engineers or people that want to be engineers.
Yep.
And then secondly, for artists that might be listening in as well.
Oh, that's hard. One of my favorite. For engineers, I feel like it's do your best and practice keeping a cool head, because I think no matter what size, you know, how much money the artist has, what size production you're running, things will go wrong. I won't say which, but I saw a absolutely humongous heavy band in Germany a few months ago, and they've got everyone on their team is awesome. They've got all the fantastic gear, like everything that you could prepare for, they prepared for. And then on that day, their front of house console just didn't work.
Wow.
And I think you would get stressed from that, but as soon as you get into that stressful emotional mindset, you can't solve the problems correctly. At the end of the day, you've just got to solve the problem. So I think it's like you've got to practice keeping a cool head to make sure you've got to be, you know, still on top of it. You can't just be easy breezy, but it's like you're not going to be able to solve a problem effectively if you're just in stress zone. You know, you've got to.
The cortisol levels affect the way our brains are able to make decisions. Yeah.
Even
it's a correlation. It's like a
and if you know, like something's going wrong, it's always better for me at least to take 5 or 10 seconds to think about it, because it's so easy to get into that mindset of you're like, oh no, you know, say you've got a keys player, it's got 6 different keys and one of them's not working or things are showing up. So easy to get in that like, oh, I'm just going to pull out all the cables and then just manually trace them, and you're like, oh, that's not the most time. It's like, but if you think about it for 10 seconds, you go, oh, okay, the Nord's showing up where the Moog should. So let's just swap those and change one thing at a time, you know, to fix a problem, you know? And
it's hard, I guess. The difficulty is that stuff comes with experience, but if you start small and, you know, say the earliest thing that you could probably encounter in a live situation is feedback. Like that's probably the first negative thing that can happen.
Exactly. That's
as a first-time sound engineer, right? You know, even long-term sound engineer. But it's like, okay, where could the feedback be coming from?
Yeah.
What am I seeing here? I had this thing when I was doing sound once where I had a monitor up like really loud for whatever reason. I don't know if I did it or it was already there.
Yeah.
And I got this real weird bass feedback hum thing. I was like, where the fuck's that coming from? Couldn't figure it out. Turned down all of the levels, turned down, and then I turned off the amp because it wasn't solved. And then I came back and the monitor knob was up. And I was like,
for sure.
So stupid.
100%.
But something like that, where if I had stopped and just thought about it, like you said, probably could have looked at all the knobs and you're like, oh, that one's really hard. Oh,
and I think that's one thing. It's like, I think when a show's going, it's different in that you've really got to solve things the quickest you can, even if it's not the best. You know, for example, say your vocal, it's just feeding back and it's not stopping. Sometimes muting that temporarily to give yourself a moment to think so the band sometimes that's a solve. But I think one thing I used to do is that, like, I used to feel as a sound person, it had to sound good straight away. Whereas I think when you've got that time to sound check, line check or something, don't be afraid to, like, if something is feeding back and you don't know what it is, rather than just stopping it, find it, even if it gets a little bit worse and, you know.
But that's a smart way to approach it, because you're not killing the show or whatever. Like you said, you know, the show can't stop.
Yeah,
it just has to keep going. And so, taking that time, I love that. That's great.
Yeah, so take the time and just, you obviously can't take forever, but just thinking about stuff too, because often the issue will show itself. And so often things going wrong, they're rarely a super complicated problem. I've had a couple which just upset you endlessly, but so often it's something silly, like something's unplugged or something's routed wrong or someone's tripped on a cable, you know, stuff like that, you know?
Yep. Love it. And then for artists?
So I'd say I feel like being on both sides of the fence. For artists on the come up, I feel like just making sure to appreciate the people, the crew and stuff that are working for you, and really make sure you enjoy the journey along. Because I think it's you've got to go into it thinking, you know, I'm going to make the most of this. But the reality is that I know how many awesome bands that everything was correct. Not all of them will make it. No, I think you getting to whatever your predefined goal is will not necessarily get there. Sometimes that will happen. So I think for artists on the come up, being aware to make sure that the whole process you're doing, you are enjoying it. Because if you're not, it's not worth it. And you'll get to the end of your 5 or 10 years and go, what a waste of time. I'm a failure. Whereas if you play in your band and you do well and you enjoy it the whole time, and then maybe you're not playing Rod Laver at the end of it or the Forum or whatever your goal is, but you enjoyed it and you still got to do things, you're going to look back and go, that was awesome. I'm so glad I did that.
Yeah.
And then I reckon for artists who are, you know, they've broken through, they've made that career, is making sure to appreciate what you have. And if you don't, you know, you might release an album that gets you to here. And this is from me, an outsider looking, because I haven't released an album that's got me any type of mainstream success or whatever. It's like, but I often see successful artists, they'll sell out the big venue in the city. They'll get X amount on the charts or whatever. And then the next thing they bring out might be not as good. All of a sudden they're selling less tickets or whatever. And I think so often people go into this like, oh, I'm a failure now, my career's over, it's dying. Whereas I think
dictating their...
Yeah, where I think at the end of the day, for me at least, I kind of see in artists, you know, if you look at artists as a business, if they're selling tickets or people are still listening, then you're still doing well. Your career's still there. It's not over, you know. I think so many people, even on like get stuck in this, if you're not growing constantly, you're failing, where I think you've really got to make sure that if you're having any manner of success, you're enjoying it for what it is, you know, like, because you're fortunate, you know. I think we know how extremely competitive the live music industry is. If you're in a position where you're sustaining yourself or whatever it is, make sure to enjoy it, because, you know, that's the whole reason why we do it. If you're not enjoying it, then just go get a boring office job and make not that, you know, and make $1 gajillion doing that, you know.
Absolutely. And, you know, another thing to add is that like you're just gaining experience. You know, who says that you deserve anything? No one. No one deserves anything.
You're right.
Just so obviously enjoying the experience is, you know, it's all the journey. It's all part of it.
100%.
We're all just like having these experiences. And who says that you might not prefer to play to 1,000 cap venue instead of, you know, a huge fucking festival or something? Like, there's no rules. There just isn't. And you might find that your fan base resonates better at something compared to something else. But I think it's at the end of the day, it's just enjoy what you've got, because you could be doing some fucking shit stuff out there.
Yeah, you could be doing way worse. And it's like, you also may not want to do it forever, even if you do succeed. So I think it's just, you've really got to make sure, you know, if you're not enjoying doing it, it's not worth doing. Because that's the other thing too. I think you see, you know, your classic jaded musician or sound person or whatever. It's the reason they get like that is because maybe they hit this point, they're not enjoying it. And it's like, if you're not enjoying it, take time off, come back, go do something else. And you'll either go do something else and realize, oh, I'm so glad I got out of that. And then you'll find what you should be doing. Or B, you'll go, oh, no, that was actually awesome. And you'll come back and you'll love it.
You'll have a new appreciation, which I think that's what for it.
COVID did to a lot of us. You know, a lot of us had to go, we're forced to give it up.
Yes.
So then I know a lot of people left, which was really sad in terms of like, but all those who came back, to me at least, it feels like so many people are more energized now, because they're like, I didn't have to come back to this. I came back by choice and I'm doing it because I love it. So let's enjoy it, you know.
That's awesome, man.
Yeah.
Thank you, dude.
Oh, my
This
pleasure.
Has been
Thanks
awesome.
for having me.
If anyone wants to like get in touch with you and just for whatever reason, how can they find you?
Just drop me an email. Like it's just my name, Shaun Fuller @live.com, or get at me on social media. Or,
check out Commoner.
Yeah, check out. Mainly do that actually. Just check out Commoner first. But yeah, just look me up on social media. Send me an email, or if we're at a show or something, just come chat to me. Like I'm always happy to chat.
Love it.
And if anyone wants to learn, and I'm where you are, if you can come, I will. I'm happy to make it happen because that's how I learn.
Love it. Well, awesome. Thank you again, man.
Oh, my pleasure. Thanks for having me.
You're welcome. And thank you to everyone for checking us out. Love and appreciation, nothing but. But, if you could do us a favor and share this podcast on all your socials, spread the word to a friend that might get something out of this. We want to showcase all the amazing talent in Australia. And if you want to stay in touch, hit follow or subscribe on the platform. You'll get all the new episodes as they come out. And I haven't said this before, and I can't believe I haven't, but we have an email address in the show notes. If you have any suggestions or questions or anything or any people that you want to hear on the podcast, hit me up in the emails. I haven't said that before, and I can't believe it's it's the first time. We're on episode 37. So hit us up if you have anything that you want to get in touch about. But yeah, we'll see you next time on What's That Sound. Thank you again.
Thanks. Listen to the playbook.
Thanks for listening to What's That Sound. Make sure you hit follow or subscribe on your podcast platform to stay up to date with each new episode. We'll catch you next time.